My son's wife, Evelyn, a woman whose kitchen was as sterile and joyless as a laboratory, tried to poison me. Not with arsenic or cyanide, nothing so overtly criminal. Her weapon was quieter, more insidious. It was neglect, disguised as thrift. It was contempt, served on a porcelain plate. She fed me spoiled food. She served me leftovers that had turned, milk that had soured, bread that was blooming with the pale green fur of decay. She did it day after day, until my stomach was in constant, churning rebellion, and my spirit was withering from the slow, daily ingestion of her disrespect. She only stopped the day she came down to her own perfect gourmet dinner, only to find a single, familiar dish waiting for her at her place setting. A portion of the same gray, putrid chicken she had tried to feed me 2 nights before, its foul scent a ghost that had returned to haunt the feast. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Beatrice. My name is Beatrice Dahl. I'm 80 years old, and for 60 of those years, my hands have been my language. I speak in the rhythmic thump of a knife on a cutting board, in the gentle sigh of dough rising under a damp cloth, in the rich, complex aroma of a stew that has simmered for hours. My kitchen was never just a room in a house. It was the heart, the hearth, the place where love was made edible. This is a story about food. It's about how the most basic act of nourishment can be twisted into a weapon of profound cruelty. And it's about how a curse, born from a stomach full of spoiled food and a heart full of sorrow, can take on a life of its own. This is a story I have never told. The shame of it, you see, was as difficult to swallow as the food itself. To be a cook, a feeder of others, and to be slowly starved and sickened in your own son's home. It is a humiliation that words can barely touch. But I have learned that secrets, like spoiled food, only fester in the dark. It is time to bring this one into the light. Before I serve you this story, I must ask for your kindness. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Knowing you are at my table, ready to listen, gives me the strength to speak of this dark time. It reminds me that a shared meal, even a shared story, is a sacred thing. To understand Evelyn's cruelty, you must first understand my kitchen. My kitchen in the small blue house I shared with my husband, Arthur, for nearly 50 years. It wasn't a large kitchen or a fancy one. The countertops were worn laminate, scarred with the ghosts of 1,000 cuts. The floor was checkered linoleum, faded in front of the sink where I had stood for countless hours. But that kitchen was a place of magic. It smelled of yeast and garlic and roasting meat, of cinnamon and melting butter and fresh perked coffee. It was the warmest room in the house, a haven against the brutal Minnesota winters. Arthur, my late husband, was a man with a hearty, uncomplicated appetite for life and for my cooking. He would come in from his workshop, his face smudged with grease, and his first question would always be, "What's for dinner, Bee?" His joy in my food was a gift he gave me every single day. I wasn't just a wife, I was the creator of his comfort, the architect of his daily happiness. Our son, Thomas, grew up in that kitchen. He did his homework at the small wooden table while I rolled out pie crusts. He learned to read by spelling out the names on my spice jars. The story of his childhood is written in a language of meals. The hearty beef stew I made on the first cold day of autumn. The towering, multi-layered birthday cakes, always chocolate, his favorite. The simple, comforting chicken noodle soup I would spoon-feed him when he was sick. The steam from the bowl, a warm, healing cloud. Food was how I said, "I love you." Food was how I said, "You are safe." Even after Thomas grew up and moved to the city to become a successful architect, he would drive home every other weekend for what he called a decent meal. He would bring his friends, and later, his new wife, Evelyn. And I would cook for them. I would spend days preparing, my heart singing with the joy of feeding my son again. Evelyn was different. She was a tall, elegant woman, with a cool, appraising gaze and a figure she maintained through rigorous exercise and a diet that seemed to consist mainly of kale smoothies and protein bars. She would pick at my food, pushing a piece of pot roast around her plate, smiling a tight, polite smile. "It's delicious, Beatrice," she would say, "but I'm watching my carbs." She treated my rich, comforting food with a kind of detached, anthropological curiosity, as if it were a quaint, unhealthy folk custom. She did not understand my language. She did not understand that the gravy was not just gravy. It was a distillation of time and care. The mashed potatoes were not just potatoes. They were a vessel for love. After Arthur passed, the silence in my little blue house became deafening. The kitchen felt cold, the stove a black, silent monument to a life that was over. I grew thin. The joy of cooking vanished when there was no one to cook for. My son Thomas saw my decline with worried eyes. And so, the inevitable conversation happened. It was the same conversation happening in households all over the country. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore. You're not eating. You're losing weight. Why don't you come and live with us? Evelyn and we've talked it over. We want you with us." He was a good son. His intentions were born of love and concern. But he was a busy man, an important man. And he was a man who was, I now realize, completely and utterly blind to the true nature of the woman he had married. I sold my house. I packed up my life, my memories, my well-worn pots and pans. And I moved into their home. It was a stunning house, a modern masterpiece of glass and stone that Thomas had designed himself. The kitchen was enormous, a gleaming, stainless steel temple to a god who was never worshipped. It had a 6-burner gas range, a sub-zero refrigerator, and countertops of polished black granite. It was a kitchen designed for a magazine shoot, not for a life. It was cold, silent, and it smelled of nothing but lemon-scented cleaning spray. Evelyn, in those first few weeks, made a show of caring for me. She would prepare my meals, her movements efficient and resentful. Her cooking was like her personality, minimalist, health-conscious, and utterly devoid of joy. My plate would arrive with a small, unseasoned piece of grilled chicken, a pile of steamed asparagus, and a scoop of quinoa. It was food as fuel, not food as comfort. I was grateful, of course. But I was also starving, not just for calories, but for flavor, for warmth, for love. The cruelty began subtly. It began with wastefulness, a sin that, for a woman who had lived through the Depression, was almost a physical pain to witness. Evelyn would buy beautiful, expensive groceries, organic vegetables, artisanal cheeses, fresh baked bread, and then she would let them rot. She was always starting some new restrictive diet, and the food from the previous diet would be left to languish in the vast empty refrigerator. A bunch of beautiful, crisp asparagus would turn into a slimy, yellow mush in the crisper drawer. A half-eaten loaf of sourdough would grow a verdant carpet of green mold on the counter. I, who had been taught to waste nothing, who could make a feast from scraps, would watch this slow, expensive decay with a growing sense of horror. I would try to salvage things. "Dear, this bread is only a day or two old. We could make croutons," I'd suggest. She would turn to me with a look of withering pity. "Oh, Beatrice, please don't be ridiculous. It's stale. I'll just buy a new loaf." And she would toss the perfectly good bread into the trash. It was a display of casual, thoughtless wealth that was also a display of power. She was the provider. She was in control. And she was letting me know that my old ways, my thrifty, resourceful ways, were worthless here. The first time she served me something questionable, I convinced myself it was an accident. It was a portion of chicken salad for lunch. It had been in the refrigerator for several days. As I brought the fork to my mouth, I detected a faint, sour, tangy odor, the first whisper of food beginning to turn. I hesitated. "Is something wrong, Beatrice?" Evelyn asked, her eyes, sharp and intelligent, fixed on my face. It smells a little off, dear," I said, my voice apologetic. Her face tightened. "Nonsense," she snapped. "I just made it 3 days ago. It's perfectly fine. Your sense of smell must be getting weaker in your old age." Shamed, I ate it. I spent the rest of the afternoon with a sour, churning stomach, a prisoner in my room, afraid to venture too far from the bathroom. I told myself she hadn't known. She was just careless. But the accidents became more frequent. The milk in my morning tea would be slightly curdled. The yogurt she served me for a snack would have a fizzy, fermented taste. The leftovers she would give me for dinner, always served with a martyred sigh about how she had to figure out something for me to eat, were always the ones that were on the very edge of spoiling. My son, Thomas, saw none of it. He worked long hours, and when he was home, Evelyn would prepare him a fresh, beautiful meal, while my own sad, questionable portion would be brought to me on a tray in my room or served to me before he arrived home. On the rare occasions we all ate together, my plate would look superficially similar to theirs, but I knew that the piece of fish they were eating had been bought that day, while mine had been sitting in the refrigerator for the better part of a week. I tried to speak to him once. I tried to explain that the food was making me feel ill. He listened with a distracted, worried look on his face. That evening, he spoke to Evelyn. I overheard their conversation from the living room. "Mom says she's not feeling well," he said. "She thinks the food might be upsetting her stomach." Evelyn let out a long, theatrical, put-upon sigh. "Oh, Thomas, for heaven's sake. She's 80 years old. Old people have sensitive stomachs. I am doing my best. I am cooking healthy, simple food for her. What more does she want? A 5-course meal every night? I am not a short-order cook. And frankly, her complaining is getting a little tiresome. I am sacrificing a lot to have her here." "Miss Treen." He was immediately contrite. "I know, honey. I know you are. You're a saint. I'll talk to her. She's just confused." He came to my room later that evening. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have to stop this. You're upsetting Evelyn. She is trying her best. You're just not used to her healthy cooking. Your system needs to adjust. Please, for my sake, just try to be a little more grateful." "Yeah, me. Grateful." The word was a slap. I was to be grateful for being served food that made my stomach churn, that filled me with a low-grade, constant dread. I was to be grateful for my son's blindness, for his wife's quiet, culinary cruelty. I looked at him, at my handsome, successful son, and I saw a stranger, a man completely bewitched by the beautiful, poisonous woman he had married. I knew, in that moment, that I was utterly alone. There would be no help from him. The cruelty escalated. It became a deliberate, calculated campaign. It became a game that only Evelyn and I knew we were playing. She would serve me a piece of leftover salmon, its fishy odor just a little too strong, and she would watch my face as I ate it, a tiny, knowing smirk on her lips. She was testing me. She was testing the limits of my endurance, of my silence. My life became a constant, low-level state of anxiety and physical discomfort. I was always hungry, because I was afraid to eat the food I was given. My stomach was in a perpetual state of unease. I lost weight. I grew weaker. The light in my own eyes began to dim. I was being slowly, methodically, starved and poisoned in a house filled with expensive, abundant food. It was a psychological torture of the highest order. The breaking point, the incident that finally tipped the scales from quiet cruelty into something far darker, was a roast chicken. Evelyn had roasted a beautiful, plump, organic chicken for a Sunday dinner, to which she had invited some of her friends. It was a masterpiece, its skin crisp and golden, the meat juicy and fragrant with herbs. I watched from the kitchen doorway as she carved it, her friends oohing and ahhing. I was not invited to join them. My portion, she informed me, would be brought to my room later. Later, she brought me a plate. It was a generous portion of chicken and roasted vegetables. It looked delicious. But as she set it down, I saw the look in her eyes. A bright, challenging, malicious gleam. My stomach immediately clenched with suspicion. I waited until she left the room, and then I examined the chicken. It looked perfect. But when I brought a piece to my nose, a faint, almost imperceptible odor reached me. A sweetish, sickly smell. The smell of meat just beginning to go bad. She hadn't served me the fresh, beautiful chicken she had just cooked. This was an older chicken, a leftover from days before, that she had stored in the back of the refrigerator. She had simply heated it up and presented it as fresh. It was a test, the most audacious one yet. I couldn't do it. My body, my spirit, my entire being rebelled. I sat there, staring at the plate, my stomach churning with a mixture of hunger and revulsion. I did not eat a single bite. Later that evening, Evelyn came to collect my tray. She saw the untouched plate. Her face, for a moment, lost its composure. A flash of pure, undisguised fury crossed her features. "What is wrong now, Beatrice?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is my cooking not good enough for you anymore?" I wasn't hungry, dear," I whispered, my eyes on the plate. "Not hungry?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You are never hungry. You are a bitter, ungrateful old woman. You know, I go to great expense, great trouble, to provide for you, and this is the thanks I get." She picked up the plate. "Fine," she said, her voice as cold as the granite countertops. "If you won't eat this tonight, you will eat it tomorrow." She marched out of the room. I heard the refrigerator door open and close. She was saving it. She was going to serve me the same spoiled chicken for lunch the next day. The game had escalated. This was no longer about neglect. This was about dominance. It was a battle of wills, and she was determined to win. The next day she did as she had promised. For lunch, she presented me with the same plate of chicken, now a day older, its foul odor more pronounced. I refused it again. My stomach recoiled at the very sight of it. That evening, she brought it to me for dinner. The chicken was now 2 days old. It had a grayish tinge. The smell was undeniable. It was the smell of decay. "Eat it," she said, her voice a low command. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me. I looked at the plate. I looked at her cold, beautiful, merciless face, and I felt something inside me snap. The quiet, gentle, long-suffering Beatrice ceased to exist. In her place was a creature made of pure, cold rage. I picked up the plate. My hand was steady. I looked her straight in the eye, and with a calm, deliberate movement, I tipped the plate over and emptied its contents onto the clean white carpet of my bedroom floor. The sound of the spoiled food hitting the floor was a wet, ugly slap in the silent house. Her face went white, then a mottled, furious red. For a moment I thought she was going to strike me. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You will regret this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "You have no idea what you've just done." She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I was left alone in my room, with the foul, stinking mess on my floor. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of liberation. The war was no longer silent. It was declared, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had just signed my own death warrant, or hers. The act of tipping that plate of spoiled chicken onto the pristine white carpet was an act of rebellion, but it was also an act of surrender. I had surrendered the illusion that things could ever be amicable between me and Evelyn. I had surrendered the hope that my son would ever intervene. I had surrendered to the cold, hard truth of my situation. I was an inmate, and she was my warden, and we were now engaged in open, declared warfare. The immediate aftermath was a chilling silence. Evelyn did not come back to my room that night. She left the stinking mess on the floor, a testament to my defiance. It was a power play. She wanted me to live with the filth, to be suffocated by the foul odor of my own rebellion. The smell of the decaying chicken, a sickly sweet scent of rot and corruption, filled my small room. It was a physical manifestation of the poison that had been pumped into our household. I spent the night in my armchair, the reek of it making my eyes water, my stomach churn, unable to sleep. The next morning, she appeared at my door. She was not holding a breakfast tray. She was holding a roll of paper towels and a bottle of carpet cleaner. Her face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Clean it up," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. She tossed the cleaning supplies onto the floor, next to the mess. I stared at her, then at the floor. I was an 80-year-old woman with a bad back and arthritis in my hands. The idea of me getting on my hands and knees to scrub a carpet was not just a command. It was a deliberate act of humiliation. I can't, Evelyn," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "My back. That is not my problem," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "You made the mess. You will clean it up. You will not be getting any food until this floor is spotless." And she left, closing the door behind her. I was a prisoner in a cell that now reeked of my own small, futile act of defiance. The hunger, which had been my constant companion for months, now became a sharp, gnawing pain. But it was more than just physical hunger. It was a hunger for dignity, for justice, for a single shred of human kindness. For 2 days, she starved me. Twice a day, she would open the door and look in. She would see me, sitting in my chair, growing weaker. She would see the untouched mess on the floor. And she would close the door again, without a word. My son, Thomas, was out of town on a business trip, a fact she had not bothered to mention to me. I was completely at her mercy. There was no one to appeal to. No one to witness my slow starvation. By the 3rd day, I was lightheaded, my body trembling with weakness. The hunger was a roaring beast inside me. I knew I was defeated. My small rebellion had failed. To survive, I had to submit. With a pain that was as much in my soul as in my joints, I lowered myself to the floor. The process took a full 10 minutes, a slow, agonizing descent. On my hands and knees, my old body screaming in protest, I began to clean the mess. The feeling of the cold, congealed chicken fat and the slimy vegetables under my trembling hands was a new and profound level of degradation. I gagged, my stomach heaving, but there was nothing in it to bring up. It took me over an hour. An hour of scrubbing, of weeping, of absorbing the full, bitter taste of my own subjugation. When I was done, the carpet was clean, but stained. A pale, ugly shadow remained, a ghost of the spoiled feast. And I too was stained in a way that would never wash clean. I crawled back to my armchair, exhausted, my body shaking, my spirit a hollow, empty thing. A short while later, Evelyn came in. She inspected the floor, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "There," she said. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" She left and returned a few minutes later with a tray. On it was a bowl of thin, watery broth and a piece of dry toast. It was the meal of a prisoner, a bare minimum sustenance. But to me, in that moment, it was a feast. I devoured it, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the spoon. The starvation ended, but the war had entered a new, more brutal phase. The spoiled food returned, but now it was served with an undisguised, punitive intent. She was no longer pretending it was an accident. She was punishing me for my defiance. She was breaking me. The incident that nearly killed me happened a week later. Thomas was home now, but his presence made no difference. He was a ghost in his own house, blind and deaf to the quiet war being waged in his mother's bedroom. Evelyn had made a large batch of shrimp curry. It was fragrant and beautiful. She and Thomas ate it for dinner on a Monday night. On Wednesday, she served a portion of it to me for lunch. 2 days in the refrigerator for shellfish was questionable, but I was too beaten down to protest. I ate it. By that evening, I was violently ill. A fire raged in my gut. My body was racked with cramps that made me cry out in pain. I was consumed by a fever that left me shivering and delirious. I was vomiting so violently that I could barely breathe. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was not just an upset stomach. This was food poisoning. Severe food poisoning. I managed to pull the emergency cord by my bed, a cord I had never used before. A few minutes later, Evelyn appeared at the door, her face a mask of annoyance. "What is it now, Beatrice?" I couldn't speak. I could only point to my stomach and moan, my body curled into a tight ball of agony. She looked at me, at my pale, sweating face, at my trembling limbs. And I saw something in her eyes that I will never forget. It was not concern. It was not pity. It was a flicker of cold, calculating assessment. She was looking at me, in the throes of a medical emergency she had caused, and she was weighing her options. Calling an ambulance would mean questions. It would mean doctors. It would mean an investigation into what I had eaten. It would mean exposing her quiet domestic crime. So she did nothing. "It's just a stomach bug," she said, her voice dismissive. "You old people are always catching something. I'll bring you some water. You just need to ride it out." She left me there. She left me to ride out a storm that felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. For 2 days, I lay in that bed, drifting in and out of a feverish, nightmarish delirium. I was trapped in a furnace of pain. I was profoundly dehydrated. I could feel my own life force, my very essence, seeping away. And in the lucid moments, the moments of pure, agonizing clarity, I knew that she was letting me die. She was standing by, waiting for her problem, her burden, to quietly expire in a back bedroom. It was the perfect, untraceable crime. But I did not die. On the 3rd day, my fever broke. The cramps subsided. The fire in my gut cooled to a dull, smoldering ache. I was alive. I was weak, fragile, a mere ghost of my former self, but I was alive. My survival, I knew, was a great disappointment to her. It was in the aftermath of that sickness, in the long, quiet hours of my recovery, that the final transformation occurred. I lay in my bed, my body a frail, aching vessel, but my mind was a shard of ice. The part of me that was capable of love, of forgiveness, of hope, had been burned away in the fever. All that was left was a single, cold, diamond-hard purpose. She had tried to kill me. With a plate of spoiled shrimp. She had watched me suffer, and she had done nothing. She had been willing to let me die to protect her own secret. I looked around my room, at the 4 walls that had become my world. I was powerless. I was a prisoner. I had no weapons. I had no allies. I had nothing. And then I realized I had one thing left. I had my will. I had the focused, concentrated power of my own soul's outrage. I closed my eyes. I did not pray to God for justice. I did not pray for forgiveness. I spoke directly to the darkness, to the cold, impartial universe. I performed a ritual of pure, focused intent. I gathered up every ounce of my pain, my humiliation, my sickness, my near death, and I forged it into a curse. It was not a curse of words. It was a curse of sensation. Let her taste what I have tasted, I thought, my mind a silent, focused scream. Let her smell what I have smelled. Let her feel what I felt. Let the poison she served me become her own personal feast. Let it haunt her. Let it never, ever leave her. I poured my entire being into that curse. I felt something leave me, a great, dark wave of energy, and I fell back against the pillows, utterly spent, empty. The first sign that my curse had found its mark came a week later. I was stronger now, able to sit in my chair, to take small, shuffling walks around my room. It was a Tuesday evening. Evelyn had made a beautiful, expensive meal for herself and Thomas. A seared duck breast with a cherry reduction sauce. The aroma filled the house, a smell of luxury and a life I was not a part of. I had been served my usual meager, joyless meal earlier. A bowl of canned soup. I was in my room, reading, when I heard the scream. It was Evelyn. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated disgust and rage. It was followed by the sound of a plate shattering against a wall. "What is this? What is this sick joke?" she shrieked. I heard Thomas's startled voice, trying to calm her. "What's wrong, honey? What is it?" That filth! On my plate!" My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy, powerful rhythm. I got up from my chair and slowly, carefully, made my way to my bedroom door. I opened it a crack. I could see down the hallway to the dining room. Thomas was standing by the table, looking bewildered. Evelyn was backed against the far wall, her face white, pointing a trembling finger at her place setting. And on the table, where her beautiful plate of duck breast had been, was something else. It was a small, gray, putrid-looking piece of chicken, sitting in a pool of greasy, separated sauce. It was surrounded by a few sad, brownish vegetables. It was the chicken. The chicken I had scraped off my carpet 2 weeks before. The chicken that had been the catalyst for my starvation, my submission. It was impossible. That chicken had been thrown in the trash days ago. It had been carried out to the curb. It was gone. But there it was, on her plate. In its place. Its faint, foul, unmistakable odor reached me even down the hallway. "What chicken?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with a complete lack of comprehension. "Honey, that's your duck. It looks delicious." He could not see it. I leaned against my doorframe, a cold, slow smile spreading across my face. He could not see it. He could not smell it. Only she could. My curse was not just a curse. It was a private haunting. A feast for one. "Are you blind?" she screamed at him, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It's rotten. It stinks. Get it out of here." She fled the room, sobbing, and ran up the stairs. Thomas was left alone, staring at a perfectly good plate of duck breast, a look of profound, worried confusion on his face. He looked up and saw me, watching from my doorway. Our eyes met for a moment. He saw a frail, old woman. He had no idea he was looking at a god of vengeance. I retreated to my room and closed the door. I sat in my chair in the darkness, and I listened to the sounds of my son trying to comfort his hysterical wife. I listened to her weeping and her accusations, and I felt a sense of power, so profound, so absolute. It was almost a physical pleasure. The game had changed. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the prisoner. I was the ghost at the feast, and the banquet of her torment had only just begun. The paella incident, the discovery of the physical, albeit hallucinatory, kibble on his plate, was the breaking point for Andrew Dutt. His war against the phantom taste had been a war against an internal, subjective sensation. Now, it had become a war against reality itself. The enemy was no longer just a ghost on his tongue. It was a visible saboteur in his food. His descent into paranoia accelerated, a sickening spiral into a private hell of his own making. The kitchen, once his kingdom of arrogant creativity, became a place of terror. He stopped cooking. The gleaming 6-burner gas range sat cold and silent. The expensive copper pans hung on their rack, untouched, gathering a thin film of dust. The man who had once lectured his wife on the importance of terroir and the nuances of umami now subsisted on a diet of prepackaged, hermetically sealed foods. His life became a series of obsessive, pathetic rituals. He would spend 20 minutes in the grocery store, reading the ingredient list on a box of crackers, his eyes scanning for any hint of meat byproducts. He would only drink bottled water, convinced the tap water was somehow contaminated. He would buy sealed tubs of yogurt and inspect the foil lid for any sign of tampering before peeling it back with the trembling hands of a bomb disposal expert. He, a man who had once flown in oysters from the coast of France, was now living on protein bars and saltine crackers. But even that was not enough to escape the curse. He would unwrap a protein bar, and the first bite would taste of chocolate, nuts, and the faint, unmistakable gamey flavor of cheap, processed dog treats. He would open a sleeve of crackers, and the dry, salty dust on their surface would carry the phantom scent of kibble. The curse was not in the food. The curse was in him. His relationship with Elizabeth, my daughter, disintegrated. His paranoia, which had once been directed at the food, now turned on her. He became convinced she was in on it, that she was his tormentor, secretly poisoning his food to drive him mad. "I saw you," he would hiss at her, his eyes wild and bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I saw you standing near the pantry. What did you put in the crackers?" "Andrew, for God's sake, I was just getting some tea," she would plead, her face a mixture of fear and utter exhaustion. "There is nothing in the crackers. You're losing your mind." Emin, and I. Or maybe, he'd reply, his voice a low, menacing whisper, maybe you're trying to make me think I am. The house, once a silent testament to their minimalist success, was now filled with the ugly sounds of his accusations and her weeping. He had created a prison for me, and now he was living in one of his own making, with his own loving wife as his suspected jailer. I watched all of this from the quiet remove of my room. I was the silent, still center of the hurricane that was tearing their lives apart. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the cold, satisfying click of a ledger being balanced. Every paranoid accusation he hurled at his wife, every sleepless night he spent, every miserable, tasteless cracker he choked down. It was a small, incremental payment on a debt of profound cruelty. The final, public immolation of Andrew's identity came, as I knew it must, at a dinner party. It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to prove to himself and to the world that he was still in control, that he was still Andrew the gourmet. He had invited his boss, a powerful senior partner at his firm, and his wife for dinner. It was a crucial evening for his career, but he could not bring himself to cook. The idea of it filled him with a terror so profound he would break into a cold sweat. So he did the next best thing. He had the dinner catered, not by a normal catering company, but by Auberge, the most exclusive, most expensive, 3 Michelin star restaurant in the city. The cost was astronomical, but to him, it was a necessary expense to reclaim his identity. The evening of the dinner, 2 chefs from the restaurant arrived and took over his kitchen. Andrew watched them like a hawk, his presence a tense, vibrating cloud of anxiety. He inspected every ingredient they brought. He watched every step of their preparation. He was a king, overseeing the preparation of a feast he was terrified to eat. The guests arrived. The table was set with their finest china and crystal. Andrew was pale, his smile a brittle, painted-on thing. The first course was served. A delicate chilled cucumber soup with a single, perfect quenelle of salmon roe. Andrew watched his boss take the first spoonful. The man's eyes widened slightly in pleasure. He nodded his approval. Andrew picked up his own spoon. His hand was trembling. He looked at the soup. It was a beautiful, pale green, dotted with the glistening orange jewels of the roe. It looked perfect. He took a tiny, hesitant sip. It tasted of cucumber, of dill, of the clean, salty pop of the roe. It was clean. It was safe. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made him dizzy, washed over him. He managed a real smile at his guests. He made a witty remark. For a moment, he was his old self again. Then the main course arrived. The dish was a work of art. A perfectly seared piece of foie gras, resting on a bed of braised figs, with a balsamic reduction drizzled around it in an elegant calligraphic swirl. It was the epitome of decadent, sophisticated dining. Andrew's confidence was returning. He had outsmarted the curse. By outsourcing the cooking, by ensuring the ingredients were unimpeachable, he had broken the spell. He picked up his fork and knife. He was about to reclaim his kingdom. He looked down at his plate to make the first cut. And then, it happened. It was not a taste. It was not a smell. It was a full, complete, and undeniable visual transformation. As he watched, the beautiful, glistening piece of foie gras on his plate seemed to melt. The rich, brown color drained away. The elegant shape sagged, collapsed, and reformed itself. The braised figs dissolved into a lumpy, brownish gravy. The balsamic reduction swirled and thickened. In the space of 3 horrifying seconds, the $300 plate of Michelin-starred cuisine on his plate was gone. And in its place was a steaming, stinking, unmistakable pile of wet, canned dog food. He could smell it. The cheap, metallic smell of the can. The foul, processed meat. He could see the disgusting, gelatinous gravy. He could see the small, square, unidentifiable chunks of meat. He stared, his mind completely, utterly, short-circuiting. This was not a phantom taste. This was not a trick of the light. This was a solid, steaming, stinking reality, sitting on his plate, a reality no one else could see. He let out a sound, a high, thin, animal whimper of pure terror. He pushed his chair back from the table so violently that it toppled over with a crash. He pointed a trembling, accusing finger at his plate. "No?" he whispered, his voice a choked, strangled thing. "No, no, no." His boss and his wife stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and alarm. "Andrew?" his boss said, his voice sharp. "What on earth is the matter?" "The food," Andrew gasped, stumbling back from the table. "The dog food! Can't you see it? It's dog food." They all looked at his plate. They saw a perfect, beautiful piece of seared foie gras on a bed of braised figs. "Andrew, what are you talking about?" Elizabeth said, her voice a low, mortified whisper. "It's foie gras. Are you feeling all right?" "It's not!" he shrieked, his control finally, spectacularly shattering. He was a wild man now, his eyes rolling in his head. "It's dog food. She did this. The witch. She's poisoning me with dog food." He began to claw at his own throat, a dry, retching sound erupting from his chest. His boss stood up, his face a mask of cold, disgusted fury. His wife looked at him as if he were a complete stranger, a monster who had just erupted at her dinner table. The evening was over. His career was over. His marriage was over. His life, his beautiful, curated, gourmet life, was over. It had all been destroyed by a phantom plate of dog food. The aftermath of the disastrous dinner party was a swift and brutal demolition of the life Andrew had so carefully constructed. His boss, a man who valued stability and discretion above all else, suggested he take an indefinite leave of absence to deal with his personal issues. His friends, hearing the story of his public breakdown, began to avoid his calls. His world, once a glittering constellation of important people and exclusive events, shrank to the four, silent, white walls of his house. And in that house, the haunting continued. He was a man besieged by his own senses. He stopped eating almost entirely. He grew thin as a rail, a gaunt, hollow-eyed ghost, rattling around in his own personal museum of terror. Elizabeth, my daughter, finally found her strength. The public humiliation, the undeniable evidence of her husband's madness, had finally severed the chains of her fear and her complicity. She saw him not as a powerful, sophisticated man to be admired, but as a cruel, broken, pathetic creature. She left him. She packed a single bag and she came to my room. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet but firm, her eyes filled with a sad, clear resolve. "I'm leaving him, and taking you with me." It was the first time in years she had made a decision for herself, for us. The final confrontation with Andrew was a quiet, pathetic affair. He did not rage. He did not accuse. The fight had gone out of him. He sat in his cavernous living room, surrounded by his beautiful, meaningless objects, and he looked at me, his eyes empty of everything but a deep, hollow exhaustion. "Why?" was all he whispered as I stood in the doorway, my bags packed, ready to leave. I looked at him, at this shell of a man, this king who had been deposed by his own poison. I felt no triumph. I felt only a vast, weary sadness. "You don't feed a person dog food, Andrew," I said, my voice gentle. "It's not a complicated rule. It's the very first rule of being a human being. You broke it, and you discovered that some rules, when they are broken, they break you back." He had no reply. We left him there, in his silent, beautiful, haunted house, alone with his hunger and his ghosts. Elizabeth and I moved into a small, sunny apartment with a little balcony where I could grow herbs in pots. We started over. It was not easy. Her heart was broken, not from the loss of her husband, but from the realization of the man he had been all along. And my own heart was scarred. But we had each other, and we had food. Real food. I started cooking again. Not for show, not for an audience, but for us. I would make simple, comforting things. A pot of chicken soup, a fresh baked loaf of bread, a simple apple pie. And as the warm, honest smells filled our small kitchen, I could feel the cold, hard knot of grief and rage inside me begin to slowly, finally dissolve. I learned something from my time in that house. Food is a language. It is the first language a mother speaks to her child. It is a language of love, of care, of safety. To corrupt that language, to turn it into a tool of humiliation and power, is a profound and terrible sin. It is a perversion of the most basic human connection. Andrew, in his arrogance, thought he was the god of food. But food is a humble, honest God. It does not tolerate blasphemy. He served me a feast of contempt, and in the end, he was forced to eat every last bite of it himself. My curse was nothing more than a mirror, reflecting the taste of his own soul back at him. And it turned out, his soul tasted of dog food. Thank you for joining me at my table today and for listening to my story. It is a reminder that the simplest things, a plate of warm food, a shared meal, a moment of dignity, are the most important things of all. Please show your support for this channel by liking this video, subscribing, and clicking that notification bell. In the comments below, I invite you to share a story of a meal that you remember with love. A meal that was more than just food. A meal that was a memory. Let's fill this space with our own nourishing stories. Love you all. This is Grandma Katherine, and I'll see you in the next story.